Lee Gotham's asking for it. A novel approach. Episode 27. The finale. Chapter 108. Lance is biking back into Venice. Michaela's convinced she's overlooked something in the Edge's recent behavior. She wants the day to gather her thoughts and focus. In the monotonous flow along Santa Monica Boulevard, it occurs to Lance that Jims doesn't call. The man writes newsy, amusing letters. He never calls. Arriving early, he intends to walk the little canals in Venice while calling to check in with Jims. He'll soak up some of the neighborhood's charm. It's been a good long while. Ruth Ann has not said how she came to be staying there, only that, given half the chance, she'd buy the place she's in. It suits her so well. He blips the throttle judiciously, just once, and the Norton climbs a pretty little arch up and over a canal. The water is a neglected swimming pool green. Under the climbing, late-morning sun, its hue is livid. It's a color that mocks the pallid eggshells and pale terracottas favored by those who have rebuilt on the bones of the original homes here. Large, blank, modernist slabs and quasi-Mediterranean villas. They all rise above the canal, each exuding the same cramped ostentation. Lance finds the address, circling the block twice before spotting it, then circles back out and away another block to find parking. Returning on foot, he realizes he's not early after all. The quaint little cottage is moss green, trimmed with a vibrant mauve. It makes perfect sense if he thinks about it. So diminutive, Ruth Ann would possess this thing like a little cloche hat. Receiving no answer at the front door, he finds his way around behind. She's managed to park her e-bike in the 10 square feet of open space inside the yard's decrepit picket fence. Lance leans gingerly on the gate, shaking his head in admiration. He hears a genteel cough, and he realizes she must be there, behind the shroud of blooming vine and shrubs someplace. He clears his own throat and knocks as best as he can on the desiccated wood of the gate. They drink iced tea. She pours it from a frosty cut-glass pitcher. She's obviously brewed the tea herself. There are ice cubes and pulped lemon slices floating. Just enough sugar to complement the strength of tea and the citrus tartness. Lance savors it as though parched from wandering lost in a desert. He reminds himself that he is not now, nor ever was, actually in love with this woman. But she has such excellent taste. I love this place. Didn't think there were anything like it left. It's so 70s. God, 60s, really. Yes, well, 1912, actually. But I know what you mean. You'd think we were back in school again, if it wasn't for the neighbors and their architects. Oh, and the waves of data beaming wirelessly back and forth inside there. She's indicated with a long-suffering tilt of the head, the window overgrown with vine behind her. Manfred and the girl are making art by the light of their laptops. Lance smiles at the wistful turn of phrase. They've been doing it all day. Her humor fosters another, broader smile on his face, and she joins him in this one. Then his iPhone announces a wireless wave of data from Toronto, Canada. Lance remembers Jims. Apologizing more profusely than necessary, he takes the call, letting himself out of the yard by its little gate. Latching the gate behind himself, he wanders up the little path separating the home's rear lots from the canal. The voice is not Jim's. A woman, youngish, formal. She ascertains that he is in fact Lance Aviarty, then tells him Jims is in hospital. A massive coronary, the voice says. His stomach is turning, and Lance feels a cold streak down the center of his back. He also feels a twinge high up under his own rib cage. Jim's is recovering, but Lance feels sadness and frustration crash over him like a monster wave out at Mavericks. He's stopped dead a few steps out from Ruth Ann's yard. The voice asks if he is still there. He makes a note of the hospital's particulars, thanks the voice for the awful news, and hangs up. He'll book a flight, leave today. Michaela will stay in case the Edge turns up. He struggles to stifle his self-pity. This happens to everyone. The death of happiness. Fleeting joy snatched away by one's own dedicated reaper. Omnipresent if obscure in the wings. Every day of your life. Ruth Ann is still there in her shaded wicker chair. She gets up when she sees Lance's expression. He mentions his friend's misfortune, tries to reassure her that he is fine, but she comes to him and places a hand on each of his shoulders. He's shaking with sobs before he can catch himself. She hugs him to her, and his brief tears wet her cotton blouse. When he's mastered himself, she promises to monitor Meekness and Mina, even visit Michaela if he'd like. She'll call, she says. Chapter 109. Shooting script. Working title? Well, rights reserved nonetheless. M. Meekness. The Dragon Lady. Name? We'll see. She stands over Jim's streetheart, at the side of his bed nearest the window. A saline drip hangs from the stand nearest her elbow. She curses once, lightly, in Italian, as she watches the open door and the nurse's station visible beyond. Tinder will soon be arriving, up the hall and out of sight from her vantage. She slips a slim glass vial of some potent narcotic out from her blazer pocket. No, this is all happening too soon. He won't have time to develop characters like Streetheart, or whatever the name would be. And it's all too fussy as well. The mechanics over-elaborate. And why is he still writing in screenplay format? The man asked him to rework a scene to specific effect. There was nothing of the cinematic in what he'd requested. Very odd, this slippage between the rich man's caprice and the rich brat's. Still, Meekness keeps fishing. Mina is out hunting. Hunting and digging. She's found a little dirt already and dished it out far and wide. She's worked Hollywood's professional gossips like a pro. Meekness envies her energy. He admires her verve and celebrates her every triumph. The screenplay coalescing in the juncture of Lance's friends' lives is a classical hero's journey, multiplied by 3, and undercut by a postmodern formlessness that allows for endless digression, unlikely characters, and unexpected events. Nothing is too believable, and so everything's believable. He should have tried this years ago. Hollywood will hate it, until they love it. How delightful. It's not only the products of Mina Weingarten's prodigious delving fueling the turbine in Manfred's writing mind. Trenchant cues, some vague but all good fun to flesh out, issued from a conversation of his own with Abiarty himself. No interrogation was required. The tidbits of personal information came without provocation either. Usually so smug, Abiarty had resembled the porous and trusting youth Meekness remembers from their school days. In a bygone fit of barstool bonhomie, Manfred once actually renamed the Canadian Tinder, Lance Tinder. It had a better, more brittle ring to it. He didn't have the swarthy Latin smolder of an Abiarty. He had clean Hollywood lines, boy next door on the surface, with just a hint of the quick to ignite. And here Lance is spilling his guts 20 years later, seeming every bit the innocent he'd been back then. Had he decided life was too short for acting? Something like that. He'd dropped the gamesmanship and reclaimed this confident modesty. There was no better way to express it, the charm that he'd possessed before his years of professional success. The conversations had opened with Lance's lauding his friend Jim's Streetheart's outsized humanity. The man obviously represented a father figure for him. There was none of the caricature, eccentric, aristocrat meekness had imagined. It was a short step from Streetheart back to the actual father. But Lance was not going back that far. So Meekness decided the father had left Lance's mother in the middle of a fight and promptly died in the passenger seat of a car crashed by a friend, alcohol involved. This might have happened not long after Meekness and Lance met. At the time, he wouldn't have even noticed the young Canadian disappearing back north in grief. Lance Tinder, the would-be novelist, left a final draft of his novel unfinished on his desktop. The desk itself must have been dragged out of his cheap flop on South Sepulveda, the shitty stretch, right under the freeway. Everything trashed by his landlord, no doubt. His mother's call had come the month prior, and Lance had flown home without hesitation. Backstory. The father's demise, his mother's distress, tragic material. Too heavy for faint-hearted hands, too real for fictional fodder. Tinder's resulting creative coma lasted 3 years. What remained of his gift he channeled into others' careers. The birth of a salesman. Agenting paid his mother's bills. His agency grew and provided till the day her broken heart relented. By then, the agency had all but eclipsed the agent's sense of self. Agency. Look into that. States of acting. Exertions of power. Not to mention darling conception of wordy theorists these 20-odd years. Enter the big girl with the buxom smile. An armor-piercing bullet tearing through the feeble scrim of the agent's life. His entire being is being sucked into her slipstream. Suspended agency? Agent interrupted? Meekness listens lazily to the free play of his mind, improvising freely with the details dropped in Lance's chatty moment. Gradually succumbing under the combined pressures of Michaela's teasing and his dalliance with humiliation porn. Oh, that was a juicy little revelation. Oh, the sap had dug himself quite a psychic hole there. Working in the edge, now that would be even more fun. Homoerotic, not a stretch. Lance coming unglued, the edge's masculine composure. Lance had been remarkably candid. Material was obviously being provided. What does a writer make of such candor? In the end, Meekness accepts a certain father-son aspect to his own relationship with the newly tender Lance Tinder. Have to admit, it's a great name. Mina's digging and Lance's sharing have given Meekness plenty to work with. He might have marshaled the elements more rigorously by now, had he not run into death earlier in the day. Ted was not dead. Ted had merely returned to a more lucrative calling. He'd forsaken the caffeine addicts of Venice and partnered with an old smack connection. With the junkie's radar that once guided his every movement, Manfred instantly recognized the man he'd never seen before. The connection wanted to diversify before he could fall off the wagon and start using again himself. So he's the money, and Ted is the front man, running the bar they've bought together. Ted always had a knack for the good, clean operation. The connection was holding several points of nice golden brown that Manfred could smell on him when the three met by chance outside Ted's new establishment. It had been many years since he'd used, but Manfred felt the chance meeting auspicious. He nodded to the connection. Ted nodded to the connection, and Manfred copped right there on the sidewalk. Provenance, the foothills in Peru. Heroin, Ted said, is the new cocaine. This chance meeting, and Ted's seemingly absurd assertion, made Manfred's day. He and Ted stepped out of the sun and into the dim bar. They had their catching up talk, with Meekness sampling the lesser house plonk. And so it was Meekness found himself writing under the influence, writing in the dark again. All through the night he writes, as he wrote so many, many nights, those many, many nights before. In the end, dead mothers of moribund men cast them off to reprimand. Melancholy is one thing. Even if you could die of sadness, it would surely take some time. Merely creative suicide is a waste, like smoking or snorting when there's a perfectly good syringe to hand. Sudden heart attack, that's just outrageous, obvious exaggeration. The widow Tinder, or Streetheart, attends at graveside. Though well into her 60s, she looks an alabaster 39, maybe younger. Cool disapproval strives with her indignation at being summoned thus. Fathers' funerals become their sons. Death becomes them all. Indignation cedes to maternal concern as funerals end by beginning again. Life and death palimpsests. He might just be developing a taste for the anti-narrative proclivities of postmodernism. Manfred keeps building on ever shiftier foundations. His own lives can be transposed by others endlessly. He's always had an outsized appetite for identities, creating them from scratch where he finds no ready models in those around him. Most of us have more than one life to reflect back upon in old age. We are not cats, 9 would be exceptional. But most folks have prior lives to contemplate as they live out their end of days. Greedily or fearfully, they relive all of these prior lives. Fat on past life, grudgingly surrendering entitlements, the dying man devours his last. The ideas envelop Meekness. The action has evaded him again. But damn it, if his characters think too much, how can they be blamed? He himself cannot be any more cerebrally stuck. What the fuck is up with people who are not thus afflicted? These are altogether rational anxieties that plague the person of conscience. Think too much? How the hell can they think so little? In our united state of denial, life remains an antebellum bowl of cherries, and blithely we consume it, eating easily half its unsavory stones. We're gamblers with no standards. Our sorry-assed ethics, untucked like sweaty shirt tails for all to see and pretend not to. These exceptionalist ethics see us going in circles, circling the drain till we're morally bankrupt, as broke in spirit as we're overdrawn elsewhere. Our paltry ethics of self-exemption is NIMBYism squared. We are living out humanity's miserable entropy. Streetheart wakes in a cool sweat. Finding his hand in tinders brings the tears out from him. He cannot account for his whereabouts, a hospital bed, nor how Lance has found him here. Meekness feels better at this. In the space of 3 short sentences, he's regained his composure. All will be well. He watches the sun rise as his laptop's display goes to sleep. More precisely, he watches the light from outside gradually penetrate the jungle foliage striving in the cottage's little paned windows. It is deeply satisfying, this billowing of his mind, here at the end of a night's imbibing. Of course, the heroin hasn't hurt. With equal parts art and presumption, he's fortified his wine, now inhaling a sniff, now again a mild fuming hit for his lungs. He'd bought a pack of smokes, easily twice the price he paid for the pack he quit on 10 years ago. The cigarettes are strewn on the silver serving tray parked at one end of the couch. With a lighter, he warmed and lifted the foil backing from each of the pack's section wrappers, old school. He'd smiled with nostalgia, fashioning the little foil roasting dishes. The wrappers are all crisped now. The wine is gone, ditto the smack. But he's 1,000 years young again. What the fuck, he thinks, and takes a single cigarette from the tray. Penetrating from the small world outside, the cloying remains of night-flowering jasmine blanket him. Enfolding his imagination, the scent evokes more humid aromas, aromas woven of sweat and essential oils, of silk lining armpits, the cleavage of some anonymous Asian procuress. Magenta creeps into the sky somewhere, complementing this scent. The whole of life at this timeless hour opens itself lazily, though without reservation. One eye fluttering closed, Meekness savors his decadence, his sleepless evening's dalliance. He lights the cigarette, welcoming its cutting through the sweetness all around him. 10,000 times he corrupts the sanitary scene. 10,000 times presents his own dank derriere, while ad men sell vanilla cosmetic, and the sheep out on Rodeo Drive pimp their lips with Botox. His job is painting it all a delicious black. He'd almost forgotten. Everything culminating in his sea grapes and succulents had celebrated humanity, sad and sweet, courageous human life. Now, rendered friendless, dry of inspiration, and broke for 20 years and counting, Meekness smiles. The procuress in the silk dress also smiles, fingering his cash. A pipe girl hovers in the dark by his pallet. Love is cloying as jasmine in the night air. Sex means accepting a sinister end. Writing is making love to a faithless whore in your parents' bed, then staring out the window to see what happens next. In Charlie's little loft bedroom, equal parts Andean textiles and Norwegian wood, Ruth Ann wakes to the foul smell of cigarettes. It is barely dawn. She feels something like anger quicken her senses. Chapter 110. The edge draws his breaths slowly, steadily through the nose. He's delaying the discomfort and incremental stresses of parching. Moving through the hot desert air, he concentrates on regulating his heart rate as well. He strides efficiently through the rocks and cacti, weighing every choice between climbing or circumventing hills and canyons. Outcroppings of limited base area he goes around. They don't require a long detour from his path. He climbs low hills or dips down into valleys when these won't require much additional energy. All is energy and H2O. He revels in the simplicity of his circumstance. At the challenging junctures in his life, with options threatening to overwhelm him, he's overcome adversity, each time with self-imposed austerities. Joshua Tree is not the world's largest wilderness preserve, about 1,200 square miles all told, including portions of 2 separate deserts. The edge has delved into the otherworldly landscape of the Mojave. It features massive and eccentric rock formations. The Joshua trees are sometimes clumped into thick little forests. Their strange arms wriggle upward, balled fists of spiky foliage at the extremities. The park is not the least visited either. Though determined to avoid it, there is an outside chance he'll encounter backpackers. He is not adventuring. A death-defying experience is not his goal, but he wants no one's company during this sojourn. In fact, he wants even less than company. Ideally, he'll end having shed something of himself. Eventually, he'll encounter a roadway, possibly the interstate. Will that be the end of his exile? Will it signal some greater challenge, greater than the scarcity confronting him here in the desert? He's stopped only once since abandoning the Panamera. Coming across a fortuitously inclined shelf of rock, he stretched out in its shade. After 20 minutes resting, he tore a 6-inch wide swath from the bottom of his cotton shirt and fashioned a meager turban before resuming his journey. He follows a vector distinguished intuitively. On setting out, he chose his direction at random. Now he merely pursues it consistently, avoids second-guessing and going about in a circle. This way his destination, however obscure, will arrive in due course. His presumptive goal amounts to working his way back out from the wilderness. He's brought nothing with him to help in this. He did not orient his departure referring to any map. The physical task, begun as a chance operation, will be accomplished depending solely upon his will, or just possibly something like fate. All notion of peril is kept in the abstract. His progress should be cool-headed, even as the desert heats up around him. The shifting scene of yellow stone, sand, and mountain blends to a nondescript blue-gray backdrop. Several hours away from the car, at first imperceptibly, the vacuum of heat has slowly relented. The Joshua trees stand out like strange musical notation, punctuating the dusky void. His mind has been quietly trekking alongside him when the past intrudes on the silent, arid evening air. Leonora's strident brand of mothering, Michaela's taunts and sexual teasing, his own mother's lost and troubling eyes. Thoughts the edge banished, the better to appreciate his trial, now return, giants blocking his path forward into the land. The eternal maternal materialized, looms up shoulder to shoulder with the ephemeral adolescent sublime. These spectres tower above and before him. Women's part in his world become the whole. He keeps his head down, places one foot before the other, staunchly evades these colossal concerns. Finally, behind him, they block his retreat and drive him, all too willing, further out into the alien landscape. Putative purpose in his life vies with the incontestable approach of death. Not long after, something in the edge wavers. It ripples like the shimmerings that plagued him all day. The mirages revisit him, though the heat is gone and the light of day with it. Is it purpose and resolve that are wavering? No, he'll carry himself forward, be it into an abyss of unknown depths. Purpose has driven him out from Los Angeles, behind the wheel of a stolen car. Breaking addiction destabilizes the junkie before redeeming him. Michaela's become a daunting habit. This self-inflicted purgatory, his chosen form of therapy, might mean deliverance down the road. The desert floor eventually tilts upward again, sparsely populated now with the Joshua trees. Where the slope crests, a plateau stretches away, suddenly featureless, devoid of any outcropping. A final, solitary, iconic frontier cactus stands sentinel in the moonlight. Barrel-chested, two fat arms bent at the elbows upward, it is an admonition to cease and desist. The music is over. You've made your bed, just lay down in it. It's time. The edge keeps moving under the moon. The wan colors of the desert floor have drained away entirely. Under the blue-black dome, shades of gray are all that remain. Chapter 111. You what? Kicked him out? Out where? We need him. Mina looks desperately into the living room's darkness, beyond where Ruth Ann sits late breakfasting on the kitchen daybed. Don't worry, he'll land on his feet. He has a little place of his own. Place? Where is this place, please? Does it have Wi-Fi? Jesus, we were just starting to get things done. I don't want to contradict you, Mina. I know it seems like getting things done, but Manfred's a writer. Don't ever forget that, because he does, all the time. I'm not sure if that's deep or just hard for me to understand. Sometimes he remembers. He might even publish, or at least stash some fair copy away someplace. Problem is, in his head, he's written it all 10 times over. Mina has taken a breath or two. Now, by small and halting steps, she's working her way in from the kitchen door, across the parquet floor to where Ruth Ann sits. Her eyes are cast down shyly, her steps slightly minced in an awkward little girl fashion. Can't you hang in there just a little longer? Until we've got a rough draft, at least. Oh, you'll get your rough stuff, don't worry. Mind you, you might want to grab everything of worth that you see, the moment you see it. He has a nasty habit of tearing things up, too. But you'll see, he doesn't need me. I'm more of a mother figure these days, and Manfred's never been easily mothered. Are you serious? I'm not seeing the mother here. I mean, don't get me wrong, you'd make an amazing mom. But I see more supermodel than supermom. You'll have to find a balance working with him, Mina. You'll see. He lives way up here, you know? Ruth Ann relinquishes a fragment of croissant she's only just reclaimed and taps her forehead with her index finger. He really dislikes the idea of a muse, but you might want to keep it in mind yourself. Mina looks down at her white wife-beater, baggy denim cutoffs, and dilapidated Converse chucks. Okay, I'm gonna have to give that one a little thought. I'm hearing everything you're saying, and I love you for it, Ruth Ann. I can tell you actually get what we're trying to do. Maybe you can keep Manfred on the path long enough to bring something fine into this world. I hope so. Oh, Ruth Ann, now I really mean this. You're a crazy big inspiration for me. And well, I know I hardly know you, but... Fleetingly, she looks up from the floor and into Ruth Ann's eyes. Then she's searching the kitchen's corners for a lifeline. Lessons. Woman-to-woman lessons. I need lessons in what you're talking about. Can you, show me or something? I'm Manfred, and you're, my goddess muse lover person. Ruth Ann's laughter is clarion. It cascades on the air and rebounds from the little cottage's kitchen walls. Mina, it's not always a sex thing, and you don't need lessons. Unless you age overnight, lose your attitude, and start shopping commercial or something. You're an ideal muse, just the way you are. Still Mina stands before her, arms reaching out limply, pleading for support. Ruth Ann stands and clasps the girl to her, pats the bleached dreadlocks where they tickle her breastbone. Mina smiles a buried, naughty child smile, closes her eyes like a cat stroked just where and when she wants it. Chapter 112. Lance calls Maxine Castigliani again while queuing for his flight. Her voice is hushed, not quite a whisper. She's with Jims at the hospital, she says. She begins informing him of the latest details when Lance hears a halting version of his friend's voice in the background. He can picture Maxine holding the phone out for him. I'm smiling, Lance. Happy, my boy. No more wayward desires. Do you know? The voice had become a whisper. A package came, my father. There was silence. Then Maxine came back on. He's out again, Lance. I'm sorry. That was the first he's spoken since I got back here this morning. Maxine finishes updating him. They coordinate for Lance's arrival, and then she rings off. Lance shuffles ahead in the queue to baggage check. In the waiting area beyond, he answers every insignificant text and email he can find. By the time he gets to boarding and presents his passport one last time, he's on to a final quick call to Michaela. Every second has been filled with smartphone distraction. How often has he worried idly about cell phone irradiation, its effects on the brain? He's just putting phone to ear once more when it buzz rings, startling him. He jerks the thing away to arm's length in a reflex, almost flinging it across the polished floor in the process. His nerves jangle as he stares dumbly at Maxine's caller ID on the display. Lance, I'm sorry. I was just leaving Jim's to his nurses. They were just changing his drip. The doctors, I'm sorry, Lance. They said that he'd stabilized. They said it was congenital. Something he'd had all his life. Oh, damn. He was such a lovely man. There might have been a choked sob. Then neither said anything for a lengthy 5 seconds. Was he still smiling? He was, Lance. Gracious to the last. I don't think he wanted for anything. Chapter 113. Jim's had been leaving the cool and fragrant confines of his friend's barber shop. Face and neck freshly shaven, his crisp collar was free of clippings. He thanked his barber, donned his jacket, and made for the door. The confused chorus of traffic noise stopped him on the threshold. With his first breath of the city's taint, he keeled over, immaculate, onto the sidewalk. Jim's survived the coronary event, regained consciousness in the care of paramedics, but couldn't rally much in the ensuing 24 hours. A genetic component complicated his condition. The same infirmity, unnoticed his lifelong, undermined his recovery as well. In hospital, his thoughts were drifting away. He was truly grateful to feel Maxine's presence. He felt her fingertips, perhaps, on his brow, and Lance, perhaps, would come. His mind still perceived phenomena, certain qualities, images with little context. An emotion would burgeon timid within him, then pass away beyond reach. His actual surroundings no longer registered. The sensations of a waning lifetime were blending, insubstantial years coalescing in a single, imperishable now. The last wishes of Jim's Streetheart's mother had been honored. Her father's name was expunged everywhere possible from the legal documentation of her life. It had descended centuries and crossed continental Europe, retracing many a crusader's steps home from Malta and the burning Levant, only staggering to a halt in post-Victorian England. For Jims's mother, that was an end to that. She had never been her father's daughter, much less her timid mother's. Much less still was she some mere product of history. Carrying her father's name forward would have implied nothing more. She had finished with that tawdry tale of rape and conquest. Regardless privilege and inheritance, she felt not an inkling of fealty her mature life long. She was a daughter to no one, save perhaps the future, when women would simply choose for themselves their challenges and create their own legacies. Jims's mother would have liked Maxine. Jims was certain of it. He'd passed control of Recalculate, including all of its considerable assets, into Maxine's capable hands. For years he'd known, of course he had known, the society would not likely survive him. An eccentric footnote to some survey of failed utopias, perhaps that. Maxine would liquidate, of course, all of Recalculate's assets. Though she hadn't deigned to inform him, alarm him, he presumed as much. He had but one request of her. Showing her the sealed envelope, he asked that she promise to read the slim manuscript it contained aloud to him at the end. In at least one significant way, Jim's Streetheart, an affluent only child, had grown up deprived. The bedtime story never figured in his rearing. The cold, damp, and darkness were his only bedtime companions. If Maxine could provide him this solace, in his hour of need, as it were, he would rest easy, his loneliness at last alleviated. At the end, he did hear her voice. He'd commissioned the intuitive American to refashion the end to his tale, and he savored every syllable until that end was come. He knew then the fleeting joy of reality's tyranny overthrown. "Give me your arm, Jims. I've something in my boot." Leaning on the gentle man, she bent to retrieve a gleaming pair of gardening shears. Holding his wrist fast, she rose swiftly back to her full height, thrusting the shears as she did, dagger-like up beneath his rib cage. The blades sliced cleanly through the tweed motoring coat and disappeared within, right to their hilts. She held him there, briefly, like a lover or a marionette. "For you," she whispered, before jerking the crimson blades free of Jim's streetheart. He sank silently to his knees, grasping briefly at the tops of her tall rubber boots, his life's most earnest "Thank you" on his lips. Finally, he pitched forward, face nestling into the rich black soil of the vineyard. And then his thoughts drifted away. Oh, the release and deliverance in that simple expression. It was Jim's streetheart's final apprehension, and in that surrender were balm and redemption. He was snoring lightly. Light and ease were smoothing his features. Having performed her disturbing duty, Maxine left the room, anxious to rejoin the day outside. She nearly collided with a nurse on her way in. Before she could gain the corridor to the elevators, there was a thin electronic alarm, and more nurses in and out of Jim's room. A doctor arrived as Maxine looked on. The first nurse was at her elbow, showing her a seat where another doctor shortly explained Jim's demise. A bargain had been struck when she'd acquiesced to Jim's request and helped him to die, apparently happy. Assisting at a death is not something Maxine had ever considered. Strange enough, the assisting, let alone being richly rewarded for doing so. A sanctioned assassin. It smacked of whoring somehow on top of the killing. Of course, she hadn't actually ended Jim's life. She'd pledged to be there and brook no efforts to resuscitate him. And, as promised, she had read to him. She'd reflect on that odd and macabre ending of his for years to come. Closing Jim's door those 5 minutes before, Maxine had stopped to stare with growing hostility at the hospital's high-concept logo complicating the room's number plate. The logo was repeated on every placard and directory. In every ward, on every piece of office stationery, corporate identity eclipsed the institution's gravity. The giant floodlit sign atop the roof didn't even include the term hospital. Having accepted the physician's condolences, Maxine made an executive decision. The Recalculate rebranding would have to go. It had been a painful thorn in her earnest English partner's side, she knew. Yes, they'd been partners, and good ones at that. The Streetheart Foundation. Maxine's mood was improved just contemplating her diminutive friend's outsized modesty. How he'd blanch at the notion of a foundation bearing his name. Chapter 114. The desert ended twice. The first time, the Edge was walking through the deep blue night. In a waking dream, he trudged through the dark, stumbling on the occasional rock or decomposing cactus. At some point, the sky grew overcast, stars and moon blotted out. The arid washpan he'd crossed became the woods he'd camped out in as a youth. The Edge moved through dark masses of trees and thicker, blacker night between them. Crickets chorused with tree frogs, forming an aural backdrop familiar from adolescence. Some trees grew sensual curves, stood hip to hip, maiden trees and matron trees. They formed rings within rings, walls behind walls in the night, enveloping him. Heedless of their close ranks, the Edge forged ahead, until his mother screamed his father's name into another night, once high and shrill as an eagle's cry. The Edge froze and listened to the night, but he heard nothing more. As he moved on across the plain, the insects and forest breathing faded as well. The next time the desert ends for real, dawn has cracked the masses of cloud on the horizon before him. There is roiling smoke shot through with unraveling plumes of flame. Briefly, his adolescent forest burns on a pixelated screen the size of this world. With daylight returned to the landscape, the Edge comes upon a roadway. An hour further up this road, a young man stands there in front of him, asking if he knows anything about engines. Then the kid's pouring Evian water into him from a 2-quart bottle and watching his face closely. He looks under the car's hood, finds a cracked starter motor mount and a frayed ground wire. He sleeps heavily. They're many miles north and east when he wakes up. He eats a hamburger the kid has bought for him. Around midnight, when the kid's worn out, he helps with the driving. Some time before dawn, he gets out of the car on a deep green mountainside without visible habitation, some hundreds of miles from the desert. Exhaustion has moved off like a huge weather system. It leaves his head clean and clear as the Colorado mountain air around him. The tops of his feet are sore where his light canvas shoes have chafed the skin raw. "Hey, what was your name?" The kid's thinly whiskered face leans out toward him from the open driver's side window. For the hell of it, he replies, "Lance." "Well, good luck, Lance." The Edge moves off into the brush with a wave. His tan shirt and gray-green sweats are soon dappled with a new layer of sweat stains. It forms camouflage blotches ringed with crusty salt lines. An hour later, he has the measure of the mountain. He's making good progress, gradually up into higher terrain. Then a sudden blow to the chest knocks him off balance, and he falls against an exposed rib of the mountainside. He's panting, unable to draw proper breath, very shallow panting, every inhalation excruciating. Transfixed with pain, he can't rise and he can't lie back. His heart's begun loping, pounding, loping again. Eyes squeezed shut against the sudden, searing barb in his core. The Edge attempts to regulate his heart's erratic beating, take stock of his body's outrageous rebellion. He has never experienced such utter incapacity. Bracing involuntarily against the rib of exposed rock, slowly, so slowly, he brings one hand up along his torso to the center of his chest. On his chest, his fingers discover a slim shaft protruding. Head swimming, consciousness dimming, he toys with the arrow's flexible plastic flights. Chapter 115. With each day the Edge remains missing, Michaela feels a little less warrior, a little more woman. Life is still like one bout of combat after another. Like Edgy always said, whether you're in the ring or not, the promoters always have something new coming down the pipe. But some important battle has been won. There may be a world of war yet to live through, but she's definitely sitting pretty for now. At the moment, Michaela has her toes in the Malibu sand. She's watching a buff lifeguard, a drink in her hand, savoring her leisure as only the hard-working can. She's yet to land her first paying gig, though in the past few weeks she's had her headshots taken and joined the Screen Actors Guild. She trains in a famous boxing gym, and on off days hits the canyon trails. She misses the Edge, her mentor, friend, and inspiration. Not a day goes by she doesn't benefit from some pearl of his wisdom firmly lodged in the part of her that strives. From somewhere, Lance has found them a beach umbrella. He's sitting behind her now, cradling her head in his lap, watching the sun dance in the surf. Michaela drowses, her cares attenuated, on hold for a time. It was little better than an eeny meeny miny mo, how they'd decided to stay put here in L.A. for now. Lance is back, focused on his agency, and, to their mutual satisfaction, doting on her less continually. Except in bed. There, she's decided, he can serve like a slave. She won't think any the less of him. Her cell buzzes on the blanket beside her. She notes Brandy's contact and picks up. Apparently, the girl thinks she's dialed a client. Michaela listens a moment, then casually reaches back, offering the phone to Lance. "Here, I think it's for you." "The ground I walk upon, right? Yeah, your true level. While I sip cognac, you scrape the filth from the soles of my shoes with your teeth. And when I kick you away, you'll still be a plaything for any tawdry slut that tempts you. Dream come true, right? Huh? You've sunk so low you're barely human. You're..." Michaela turns to read Lance's expression when he hands her back the phone. Oh, she's got talent, I'll say that much. I know a budding young Hollywood director might just have something for her. Brandy has her own drink on the go. A triple soy iced latte Dick has prepared with their brand new Gaggia espresso machine. It's baking hot. Late afternoon on the condo's patio, and Brandy is making her last call of the day. She doesn't even wait for Slave John 1 to answer. Just goes straight into it. After a minute, there's laughter on the other end of the line. Brandy hesitates, confused. Then she recognizes the laugh. "Kayla? Whoops, sorry, had you in queue, I guess." "All good, girlfriend. Lance here just got the freebie of his life." "Oh, really now? Well, tell him his bill's in the mail. Hey, listen, random butt dialing and oversharing aside, Dick's just brought me a letter that's for you. Looks like it's from Mamacita. Should I open it or send it along?" "My mother? Jesus, from smut to slut in one short call." "Yeah, go ahead. What the hell, open it up." "Oof, yeah, I don't know. Sounds like maybe I should give it to you in a better mood." No, I'm good. She's been blowing me off for years. I can't wait." "Sure now?" Yeah, I'm in a really good place. In good hands, you might even say." "Do it." "Well, I'll need those details soon. But if you're sure, let me see now. Hang on. Envelope. Oh, wow. Kayla, it's a wedding invitation." "A wedding? Who the hell?" "Consuela Esperanza Mendoza and Hector Angel Octavio Mendoza." "Brandy, who's it say is getting married?" "That's it. Just let me finish." "Okay, but read it real slow." "Michaela, it's in English. Are proud to announce their wedding." "Their wedding? Theirs? Those are my parents, Brandy. They're already fucking married." "Okay, potty mouth. Okay, don't shoot the messenger. Look, those are the only names on the invite, girl. Looks like your folks are going for round 2. "Oh, for God's sake. Nobody's even heard from my father in 20 years. "Well, apparently your mother has." Michaela searches the Pacific Ocean. Then she levers herself up from Lance's lap. "Brandy, I gotta go." She stashes her cell in her purse, adjusts the straps of her bikini top, and smooths out the smirk she can feel forming on her face. Then she turns around to sit cross-legged, facing Lance. She's looking him sternly in the eye, and after a pregnant pause, he begins to feel a degree of concern. Yes? Good answer. But this time wait for the question. Are you going to marry me or what? The end.